This is episode 2 of the ABA MPT podcast and part 2 of my interview with Dr. Abigail B. Calkin to discuss her extraordinary life. In this episode, Abigail rejoins us and shares her very close friendship with Diana Dean and their search together into understanding inner behaviour. Her move to Kansas to get a Ph.D. with Ogden Lindsley, her use of precision teaching with her own son, her views on errorless learning, how she learnt Russian using SAFMEDS, how she tracked her own feelings and thoughts and practiced writing positive statements for a minute a day to change her behaviour and her relationships, and so much more. I welcome back Dr. Abigail B. Calkin.
I am so honoured to have Abigail Calkin return to record a second episode with me. Just a little bit of your life in the first 2 hours that we spent together, and then you have done the incredible thing of agreeing to come back and tell us more about your journey to precision teaching and writing, your incredible recent discovery of living with epilepsy and the impact that's had on your life. And then what has become so fascinating to me is your journey into inner behaviour and how you've tracked your own behaviour and some of the lessons that come out of that for how to treat your own behaviour and how to intervene on goals for yourself. So I'm very excited to welcome you back on the 2 days away from you heading off on for a month.
Right.
Yes.
Well, thank you. You have a delightful personality, and it's very fun to work with you on this. I appreciate it greatly.
Oh, that's so nice. I figured that if you're laughing, then I may be doing a good job, and because your laugh would lights up the world, it's incredible laugh that you have. And so beautiful. Yeah, it's in my head now, so I will take it with me everywhere. So thank you so much for this episode 2. I'm just going to review where we got to. Goodness, I don't think you expected me to take you back to your upbringing, but goodness, what an extraordinary start to life that you had, surrounded in a family of, well, I can say high achievers, but people that were disciplined in terms of their, organizational skills. We were just talking about from an early age how your father was a very organized worker, and you were exposed at an early age to being incredibly organized and focused, and then across your life developed some incredible interventions about how to track your own behavior and count your work time, all sorts of things. Anyway, we're going to get onto that. So I wanted to start just by taking up where we left off, and that was you were just arriving to see Og. You had decided across the course of the weekend that you wanted to move to Kansas and to take a PhD under his guidance. What would you like to say about that move and how that went? And I bet you, because I know now enough about your memory, that you would remember your first conversation with Og.
Well, this wasn't my first conversation with him. I do remember an early conversation with him. I'm not sure whether it was the first one or not, but the sequence of what made me make the decision of moving to Kansas and getting a PhD with him was that Diana Dean and I were very close friends, and she had started a nursing school program at Mount Hood Community College in Portland, Oregon, and everything was charted, and including the marvelous thing of having students count positive and negative feelings about different classes they were in, different practica settings that they were in, and that helped people decide whether they wanted to work in geriatrics, med-surg with adults or children. And so we could literally look at those charts and see this person had a lot of negative feelings when working with children and a lot of positive feelings when working with adults. And therefore, don't take a job at a hospital when you graduate where you're going to be working in pediatrics. You need to work in gerontology or vice versa. It was just...
Wow. So can you just give the background to how you met her and how she came in contact with the chart?
Diana was 5'2", and I met her at the University of Oregon. She was a friend of Eric Cotton's. They had been known one another in Kansas, and she came out to visit him. And I walked into Eric's, I don't know whether it was his office or not. It was more like a university classroom or lab room or something. Anyway, Diana was standing there leaning against a cabinet. She had on heels, I remember that, and a suit. Whether she had on a suit or not, I don't know, but she looked very sophisticated, which of course impressed me. And
just remind us, what year is this, Abigail?
This would have been January of 1968, I believe.
Right. Yeah.
And it would have been after Christmas break. And so Eric had gone back to Kansas, and perhaps she came back to Oregon with him. She was not moving to Oregon at that point. And I met her, and we just, you know how sometimes you meet someone and you just click right away. And it was one of those. And it was sort of like, oh, yes, Eric's over there. We should include him in the conversation. But it was sort of irrelevant. And I remember her as being very tall. She was slender. And I remember her as being like 5'7" or 5'8", which of course she wasn't. But we just developed a friendship. I remember we used to complain when we got over 100 pounds, especially if we got up to 108 pounds. I don't know what system you operate on there. I remember being... When I lived in England, it was stones, but you're not on stones, are you?
Yeah, we're metric, yeah.
Metric, okay, so you're not.
I should be able to do that conversion, yeah.
Right. And so anyway, we used to say, oh my gosh, I'm so fat, I just hit 103 pounds. It was like, of course, neither one of us was fat. Neither one of us was slightly overweight. But anyway, that was one of the fun things. Oh, I had a dog that had puppies. She took one of the puppies. Her boys were, I think, 6 and 8 when I met them, when they moved to Oregon. And my son at that point was about a year old, maybe 2. And I remember visiting Robert and I, and Seth visiting Diana and Donnie and Derek. But Seth didn't talk much. And Diana thought this was dreadful. He was 17 months old. Oh. And she was just so marvelous at everyday things. I mean, we would be sitting talking on the sofa, and one of the boys would come up with a mommy, you know, he had a question, and she would reach out her arm and touch him while she and I were finishing whatever topic we were on, and then she would pull him to her and look at him and say, what is it you want? And, or, you know, what's your question? And I learned a lot. I mean, my mother was a great mother, but I learned a lot about mothering from watching her with her boys. And then Seth thought they were marvelous. He tried to figure out how Donnie and Derek, he was 4, Donnie and Derek were his cousins, but he wasn't quite sure of how that worked because he knew that Diana was not my sister, and he knew that Diana, I was married before Robert, and he knew that Diana was not Ed's sister, and she wasn't Robert's sister. So how were Donnie and Derek his cousins? And so it was just, you know, this very close familial relationship. And Donald has asked me for his daughters, because Diana died when the boys were 13 and 15, to write my memories of her, because he said, you probably knew her on a personal level better than anybody else. And I mean, other than her siblings, but as an adult and an independent person. And so I'm afraid I've started that and I haven't gotten too far. I'm probably about a third of the way through. But Donald has 2 daughters and Derek has 2 sons. So I definitely want to do it for them. And it's fun writing them too. And it involves a lot of insight too, because Diana was African American, as are her boys. And I remember she and I were talking about renting a place together, you know, 3 boys and the 2 of us. And she said, oh, that's one place I looked at. I said, oh, that's gorgeous. We should do that. And she said, well, I inquired, and the man obviously didn't want to rent to me. And very naively, I said, well, why not? And, you know, the boys are in the back. And it's like, I got this look of, Abigail, let's not talk about that right now. This was 1972 or something. And that's one of the stories that I need to write, just to offer what was the world like then. And I don't get angry very often, and I didn't raise my voice or anything. I just remember inside just feeling so angry that somebody would behave that way, that the owner of the farmhouse would. And I said, well, I'll rent it. And she said, you know, it's like, that's not going to work. And so anyway. Oh, Eric would talk to me. Og was very interested in the inner behavior. I don't know as I knew him then. Eric was interested in it. Diana was really interested in it. And we used to sit and talk about it a lot with these 3 boys running around. And you know, you reach out an arm to keep them quiet till you finished a statement about inner. And it wasn't, we didn't know where we were going with it. You know, we knew we knew the aim that we had, but we didn't know an aim, a specific aim. We knew it was more like we were searching. And to have somebody to do that search with was wonderful. And so I was to give the keynote speech at the Washington State Conference or Council for Exceptional Children. And Diana died a couple of days before that. And I said, there's no way that I can stand up dry-eyed in front of however many people, a couple hundred people that would be there. And so I just said, I can't make it. Well, it happened that her memorial service in Portland was the same day as that. So I called Og on a Tuesday, or Wednesday, not knowing whether he knew that she had died or not. She had cancer. And the week before, one of my graduate students, I was teaching graduate school at Western Oregon University, which was Oregon College of Education at that point. But so I called up Og, and I had the day before I had told a graduate student that I was never going to get a Ph.D. off the books. Elaine, Eleanor, I can't remember her name offhand. No, that's not in my script. So I talked to Og, and he said, so what are you doing? And I said, well, I was thinking about getting a Ph.D., and I was trying to figure out the next, pause. And in that pause, where I was going to say, but I decided not to do that, Og said, come to Kansas, study with me. I was like, oh my gosh. And I said, well, gosh, it gives me goosebumps even to think about that. And it was like, my husband's coming into town tomorrow, and we're going up to Diana's memorial service, and let me talk to him about it. So meanwhile, a couple of days later, the student walked by, stuck her head in my office and said, never, and walked on. So I'll never forget that. And so Robert arrived. We spent the night at a friend's house before driving up to Portland. And I said, what would you think about moving to Kansas so I could get a Ph.D. with Og? And he looked at me and he said, well, if that's what you want to do, yeah, we can do that. It was like, okay. So I had asked Og to give me 2 or 3 weeks to think about it. I called him back the following 3 or 4 days later and said, okay, I'm coming.
And how long did it take you to move?
Well, I was teaching summer school, and Oregon term started the end of September. So I just assumed that Kansas did too. So I said, summer school ended on the 10th, I think it was, of August. And I said, well, I'll be there the middle of September. He said, well, you can't do that, in a different phone conversation. He said, the term starts the 19th, or the semester starts the 19th. And I'm like, I finish on the 10th. I have papers to correct. I have charts to look at. I have to turn my grades in. We have to pack up the house. I mean, we're talking, this is May by now. Pack up the house. I was teaching a full set of summer courses and commuting back and forth about 60, 80 miles each day. And I remember when we moved, the last thing in the house was the canning pot, the big, blue and white speckled canning pot that you use to process jars. And the sauerkraut was still in the crock, because it takes 10 days to 14 days to let the sauerkraut, and you salt it and wash the cloth and all this stuff. And the last thing I did, everything else is completely out of the house and in the trailer, was to jar the sauerkraut.
Wow.
Put it, and I had 12 quarts, and put it in the box, and then take the box out and, wash out the crock and take the crock out. It was like, really? You did that? Because I had from the 10th, and probably didn't leave until the 12th, because I had to turn the grades in, and needed to be there on the 16th or the 17th to enroll.
Jesus. And
so we just drove straight to Kansas, and with our sauerkraut in the trailer and a whole bunch of other canned goods. And it was quite a trip. And neither one of us had lived in the Midwest at all. I mean, we might as well have been, both of us would have felt more comfortable moving to England or, Ireland, I should say, Ireland or Australia. than we would have moving to Kansas.
Midwest.
I mean, it was just, it was someplace that was familiar. And then moving to the Midwest, which was like a foreign country.
Yeah. And how did you find it when you arrived? Like, how did you find
extremely hot. It definitely was in the mid-90s. And
the
cracks in the lawn leading up to married student housing were about 4 inches wide, and I don't know how deep. And it was like, this is absolutely miserable. And I mean, I felt that way. My husband, 4 to 5 inches would be 15 centimeters.
Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. And so, it was just, so we didn't have much money. And I told my mother we needed an air conditioner, and she sent me the money to buy an air conditioner, which just saved us. I mean, neither one of us was used to heat like that. And so,
how old was Seth?
Seth was 4. He was about to turn 5 a week or two after we got there. You know, I mean, any kid that age is ready for an adventure. And so he didn't mind this at all.
You know, when I first moved to Indianapolis, I was overwhelmed by the friendliness of the people there. People think Australians are friendly, but I remember the first day I arrived in Indianapolis, it was very cold. It was, when did we arrive? Anyway, middle of winter, and it was a record cold winter. And I remember I had my daughter with autism with me. There's a lot of understanding compared to Australia of autism, especially in the Midwest, I found. And I was trying to carry her because it was snowing, very cold, and carrying my groceries. And this guy came up and took the groceries off me, and I thought I was being robbed. Nobody would do that here. Nobody would. And he was just carrying my groceries for me to the car. And that was my first day. And I found every day after that, everywhere I went, when I told them that Juliet had autism, people went so out of their way to help. She was having a food expansion program then, and there was a restaurant, and this lady used to set up a special, I'm going to cry when I say this, but this lady would set up a special table for us where we could go and do desensitization. We were working on pizza at the time. And she would set aside part of the restaurant, and I was just overwhelmed by people's willingness to go out of their way and just how friendly everybody was, just with good morning, how are you, have a wonderful day. That's what I remember. And I'd be like, where am I on the planet that people are so willing to give their time and energy to somebody else they don't know? I was overwhelmed by my time in the Midwest, by the friendliness. I don't know, maybe it's just by comparison to us. People think Australians are the friendliest people on the planet, but I was overwhelmed by the Midwest. I loved my time there.
One of the things that struck me about the Midwest, other than the fact I'd lived on the East Coast, I'd lived in England and Scotland for 3 years, and I'd lived on the West Coast, and I truly felt as if I was moving to a foreign country. And even one time when we lived there, I flew to England to take care of some things, and as I was flying back into land at Kansas City, I thought, I may be an American, but I feel a lot more comfortable walking around the streets of London than I do living in Kansas. I mean, it just felt much more natural to me. And
what was it that struck you as so different?
I don't know. I just always felt comfortable in New England, which is 6 states in the States, Nova Scotia, where half my relatives live, and in England, where I'd lived when I was 15 and then 21, 22, 23. And it was just, I knew how things worked there. I mean, I had relatives who lived there. I had no relatives in Kansas. Yeah. So I had no frame of reference. And what I found compared to, although New York is notorious for unfriendliness, what I found was it was very difficult to make friendships, deep, meaningful friendships with people in Kansas. And it probably took me, other than my fellow graduate students, it probably took me about, after we moved to Kansas, about 13 years before I found a group of people that I still have friendships with them. And, we're still very close. And it's hard to realize that it was 30, 35 years ago we knew one another. Nobody had gray hair. Nobody had a wrinkle. So here I was in this foreign country. Hot foreign country. And my best friend had died a few months earlier than that. And, sort of what was I doing here? And Robert, my husband, had no idea what he was going to do. He hadn't gone to college, and he thought, well, I suppose I could move to Kansas City, about, 50 miles away, and I could live there, and I could go to one of the community colleges. University totally intimidated him. Diana's mother said he could live at their house, and Diana's stepfather was chief of fire department. The fire department said, I'll get you a job so you can work part-time. And they were just so accommodating and so wonderful. And then Robert decided that he was going to try a semester at the University of Kansas. And talk about working hard. Same as how I felt, it's like, I've got to work hard. And he thought he was going to flunk everything, and he ended up with straight A's his first semester.
Wow.
And so, he walked into, we were living in married student housing. He walked into the next door, this neighbor's apartment, and he was crying. And all these guys thought, oh my gosh, he flunked. And he said, I got straight A's.
Oh.
They were all ready to kill him because he had complained so much. But I never got him to count anything academically, but within the family, especially when my niece moved in with us, we were back, where were we living? No, we were in Kansas. She moved in with us, and so I thought, we really need to do a few family projects here. All of a sudden we have a 16-year-old who was living with us, and my son was 11. My husband was working 3 jobs. He'd already graduated from nursing school. Yeah, he'd already graduated from nursing school. And then I was a principal of a school for children with emotional and behavior problems. And so then finally my husband said one of the most brilliant things was, he said, all right, we're ships passing in the night, and we need an hour a week that is devoted just to the 4 of us. It cannot include meals, TV, a movie. It has to be interactive. And so we did things like go for walks, go for hikes, play Monopoly on the living room floor, sit in front of the fireplace and talk. I'd probably have to ask them what some of the other things that we did were. But, we did all kinds of things. And I would have, they all thought I was like, oh, Mom, here you go again. Everybody has to count positive feelings and negative feelings.
Oh, really?
Yeah, right. And this would have been 1982. That's when my niece Abby moved in with us to finish high school.
How did they count them? What did they use to count their behavior?
I probably gave them counters.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't remember offhand. I'd have to ask one of them, what did you use to count? But I think I probably gave them counters to use.
And did Seth know how to chart? Did he know what a chart was?
Oh, he definitely knew what a chart was. Yes, he did his very first chart when he was 5 years old.
Wow.
Because when he would catch a ball, he would go like this. And it's like, well, if you can't see it, you're not going to catch it. And so Og decided to make a film of me teaching him. Somehow the film has disappeared, so we don't have it.
Oh.
I still have the chart. And it's marvelous. He used probably blue, I think, maybe, rather than green. Blue for the dots and red for the X's. Blue for the times he caught the ball and red for the times he missed. And there was a whole lot of really close overlap. I've shown this chart. I don't think I've ever published it, but I've shown it a lot at conferences when I give workshops. Yeah. And because people say, well, you can't, this is too hard. I can't do this. I'm not mathematically inclined. And so it's like I slap up a chart from a child who was 5 years old.
This is my 5-year-old.
Yeah, right. This is a 5-year-old. And of course he'd, written on the bottom, go KU, University of Kansas, KU.
Yeah.
Filled in the numbers with, red or blue or, he decorated the chart. So it was his.
Oh.
And then he got stuck in the middle where they just overlapped. The corrects and errors were about the same. The catches and misses were about the same. And so then we went, I think, to a 2-minute timing. And then they began to separate. And
wow.
So, it was a whole lot of fun. We all enjoyed it. And Seth just thought, Og was great. I remember telling him one time, you can, I also did something with him using a linguistic reading program and a whole language reading program. And the whole language one was terrible. And I mean, it wasn't that his frequencies were bad. It was just, oh my gosh, these stories are just so insane. So I said, Og said that it doesn't matter if you make a mistake. You just keep right on going. And he said, really? Og said that? And so he just started reading faster. And and then another time
So you realize, in the community of behavior analysis, there's many fields of thought that, learning should be errorless, correct?
I do not agree with that.
Yeah, I would love you to talk a little bit about that, because
okay,
I think there'll be many people listening here that may not have been exposed to that type of conversation from a precision teacher.
You learn by your mistakes. I mean, I have learned by my mistakes. So the idea of, okay, what year was it? It was 1987, I think. Yes, I was going to go to Russia in December of 87 to January 88. And I thought, well, I can't go without knowing some Russian. So I bought a book on Russian. Actually, I think I may have bought it beforehand. And the reason why I wanted to learn Russian was because I read some of Anna Akhmatova's poems in English, and I thought, if they are this good in English, they have to be absolutely fabulous in Russian. Therefore, I need to learn Russian. And so that was my motivation. And so I bought flashcards, and I did 1-minute timings before going to work, read them in Russian, just flipping as fast as I could, Russian to English, and then English to Russian. That was really interesting. What else did I do? Reading phrases.
Like how many timings would you have run?
Oh my. Those 3 plus reading Russian, speaking Russian. Actually, it's in the Journal of Precision Teaching.
Is it?
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I don't exactly know what year, but it was quite a few.
Yeah.
Quite a few timings that I was doing.
And how many timings each day would you run of those flashcards in a row?
Well, it would depend upon how well I did. Because
so you'd always end on a high.
Right. I'm of the opinion that when I do a bunch of timings, I think the timings chart, was that out then or not? I'm not sure. Anyway, the timings I would do, I would take the best one and chart it, because that made me push further. If I had taken the middle one or the lowest one, it's like, well, all I have to do is beat, 57. If I get 59, that's okay. Oh, no, honey, you gotta beat 72. That was your high.
Yeah.
So you got to do better than 72. So however many timings it took me to get better than 72. Some of them, occasionally it was 10 timings. Rarely was it that many. And so then the speaking was a problem, because I could speak Russian at 35 to 50 words a minute. And I thought, well, that'll put any Russian speaker. Well, this was when it was the Soviet Union then. This will put any Russian speaker to sleep at, that speed. So I still don't think, matter of fact, I know I'm not. I keep looking over there because my Russian flashcards and my French flashcards are over there. So
you would be looking at your rate of error, and I would call them learning opportunities, correct? So you'd be looking at your rate of LO, and that would inform you next teaching goal, presumably, if the errors were not shaping out.
I didn't have that problem. My issue with learning Russian, and by myself, I covered probably 2 semesters in 1 semester. But I knew I was going to Russia in December. So, I had to do something. And it was interesting because there were 5 people on the trip who were fluent. 3 of them were born and reared in Russia or in China after they had left Russia. And then Tony, my friend, who was the concert conductor. It was the 1000th anniversary of the Russian Orthodox Church, and he had found the original manuscript of Rachmaninoff's Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom at, get this, a monastery in Scranton, Pennsylvania. And he transcribed it, and, because it was all in pieces, and put it together and taught this this American group in Maine, and another 2 in California, to sing in Old Slavonic Russian, which was what the church liturgy was. I mean, amazing fellow. And so we went on that, but I had to learn some. So on the trip, there were these 5 fluent Russian speakers, and then there were 5 of us who had covered about 2 years of beginning Russian. But we could manage to ask a question, a direction question in Moscow, and get the directions, understand them, and then go to where we needed to go. And that was very, very rewarding. I was flabbergasted when I think of it now that I could cover an entire year of Russian in 4 months.
And that intervention of daily SAFMEDS.
Oh, absolutely. And did I worry about whether I made an error? No. When I do a reading of something I've written, or poems or something from a nonfiction book or a novel, it's nice to be able to read absolutely fluently and never make a mistake, but that's not me. And so I gloss over it, I cover it up, I go back, something like that. So I figure in learning, and I learned this beforehand, you make mistakes. A mistake is an opportunity to learn how to do something better. And if I'm on the shuttle to the moon, mistakes probably cannot be tolerated. But I'm not the only person on there. So I've got, there were 3 of them. If there was a mistake, they could probably, one of them would say, whoa, or something would be, they could double check with another person. Yeah. I don't know whether they did or not, but, hypothetically, I think that. And OG was, you don't have to have Errorless Learning. People make mistakes in life. Hopefully we don't make the giant ones.
I wanted to ask you a question there because, Dr. Behrens and I have talked a lot about that, how it informs your instruction. If you are working with a student that continues to make errors in the absence of any prompts or assistance, that should inform your instruction.
Phase change line, if the errors are consistent, and then work on that particular item, and then mix it in with the rest of what they're doing. I mean, one of my favorite ones was the BD mixture. And so what I would tell the kids, or actually they were graduate students, I would say, this is what you need to do with your elementary children. You say, we're taking all the D's away. You will not see a D until I tell you will. So all the words have B's in them, no D's. And so they work on that with the timings until the child was fluent with the B's. And then you announce to him, okay, I'm taking all the B's away. You will have only D's. And when they're fluent in that, you could say, okay, we're done with the D's. We're putting the 2 of them together. And, I didn't find that any of them made mistakes with the BD confusion after that. But if they read, and part of it I learned too from teaching adults to read, non-reading adults how to read. And one of them here in Alaska and one in Oregon. And, it's like they're okay making a mistake. You learn from your mistakes. If you take a left turn and you should have taken a right turn, you figure it out. I mean, you're not dropping off the edge of a cliff. So, no, I've never been, you have to get errors down to 0. Anything between 0 and 2 or 3 is fine with me.
Okay, well, we could spend a whole episode on that. But let's get back, because now we're in Kansas. We've been to Russia and back, and now we're back in Kansas with the giant cracks in the grass and heat.
Right.
And I want to just add in there, because you told me something before the recording of this podcast, that for a long part of your life you would be up at 4 a.m. in the morning.
Right.
So you have created a life which is, requiring a lot of discipline to get everything done that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And here you are about to start your Ph.D. So how did it start?
There were 3 of us who started at the same time, and he said, I want you to get all A's this semester. I'm a maverick. He didn't say that, but I'm a maverick, and we need to impress the department. And nobody had ever told me.
What did that mean? Yeah, what did that mean? Like, let's take up the question that I was going to ask you is, is it true that Og was not in the behavior analysis department of Kansas University?
Correct.
Yes.
He was in the AFHE, Administration and Foundations of Higher Education.
Right.
And so that was the department he was in. The department chair really liked Ogden. They had a very good relationship. And I don't know exactly why, what happened, whether it was an intellectual disagreement or a personality disagreement with the people in the behavior analysis department. We didn't even call it behavior analysis then.
Yeah.
Golly, I can't remember the acronym for that. Human Development and Family Life, HDFL.
Right.
Human Development and Family Life.
Wow.
And
right.
so, but he told me when they would give open lectures, like Don Baer or Todd Risley, or, oh my gosh, I just forgot the other one. Sorry, that, go to this lecture this afternoon. So I was like, okay, I'll go. So I went. God, that's embarrassing not to be able to remember the other person. Anyway.
It'll come to you.
Yeah, it will. Maybe, hopefully not at 2:00 in the morning. And anyway, and so he didn't necessarily go, but he would tell me to go and others, and we would go and learn something. That was very valuable. And as I mentioned earlier, when Eric didn't show up, until about 2/3 of the way through the fall semester, we watched films of Lovaas and Ellen Reese and, Skinner and other people. And so we got some background, or the others weren't there then. They were, I don't know where they were, but they were not in that part of the country. And so I got some background that way. And then I'm sitting here listening to these other people. But there was something about the measurement and looking at frequency, not looking at count. Because my master's advisor, Barbara Bateman, said, that's fine. You can teach a chimpanzee to read. But if you're going to get to, 50 words a minute, it's probably going to take you 200 years. I don't even remember the numbers that she said.
Wow.
But you can do it. That was probably based on, some of the work that Harry Harlow had done with chimpanzees, which I really liked his work a lot. And so, and I never forgot that. And she didn't know much about precision teaching. I mean, she and Eric were not buddy-buddy. And I probably told her more about precision teaching than anybody else did. Maybe not, because Clay was one of her students as well. And Clay Starlin and Ann Starlin. So back to KU now, from the U of O back to KU. By the time I finished Eric's first class, which for me was 4 weeks long, not 10, for all of us that first semester, this is genius. I mean, you have to have standardization on measurement. Blood pressure is standardized. Carbon dating is standardized. All of these things that my father would bring home as ideas and talk about, they're standardized. And so it's like, why not standardize measurement of learning? And I mean, it was just, that was what sucked me in that first month that I had of precision teaching.
What was Eric's course called? Do you remember?
It was called Precision Teaching.
Yeah, right.
It was called Precision Teaching, and nobody on campus knew anything about what it was about. And Barbara Bateman was my advisor, and she said, I don't know what this is about, but you are the guinea pig, and I want you to go take the class and come back and tell me what it's about. And should I recommend it to other students? And
what did you say?
Came running back, and it's like, oh my God, Barbara, this is incredible. Blah, 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 blah. Give her all this explanation and everything. And, measurement was not her area, but she knew. Yeah. So the following semester, or following term, winter term, I took it fall term, winter term, and spring term, the rest of, the department students, graduate students, started taking precision teaching from Eric. So there was a real strong cohort at the University of Oregon. And the action, I mean, that's where the 1 minute timing started, was in Ann Starlin's classroom. And Clay was working on his dissertation. And Eric had suggested it, according to Eric, which I love this story, and according to Harold Kunzelman. Eric said it was Harold Kunzelman's idea. Harold Kunzelman said it was Eric's idea. Harold was in Seattle at the time, heading up the EEU, the Experimental Education Unit at the University of Washington, and Eric was in Eugene, and they had known one another in Kansas. And according to both of them, it either occurred on a weekend when Eric went up to Seattle, or it occurred by phone, probably about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, when both of them had had too much to drink and smoked too much pot. They both gave me the exact same story. And Harold said, I think it was Eric who came up with it. And Eric said, I think it was Harold who came up with it. So we will never know. They're both gone. And it wouldn't matter anyway because they each credited the other one. And so it was an idea developed by two people in a middle of the night, inebriated, stoned phone conversation or in person. That was the one thing they couldn't decide.
I have 1,000 questions for you, but I want to just talk to you about that because there'll be a lot of people listening here that I'm hoping that are outside of precision teaching within other disciplines. So I want you just to say a little bit about the 1 minute timing because this is something that everybody could incorporate into their life, correct?
Og and Julie Vargas both said, you have to look at maybe I should give Og credit for this, right? No, I think they both said it. You have to look at the whole behavior. And Julie makes a point in one of her articles that you're not looking at the whole behavior when you take a sample of it. And I like that. I mean, she said it in print much better than I just said it. And then Og was saying, well, he argued with Eric and Harold and said, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. You can't do that because you're only looking at part of the behavior. Well, the problem with Og's objection was that Harold and Eric were coming up with increases in corrects learning and decreases in the errors. And when they showed that to Og, it's like, I don't know what he said because I wasn't there, but it's sort of like, okay, guys, you win. We can do the 1 minute timing. And then I used the 1 minute time. Well, fast forward to 1970. The first 1 minute timing started in April, the beginning of April 1968. So fast forward to, I think it was the fall of 1977. And I was writing in my journal. I was in counseling. I was jogging every day. I was working hard as a student. I was doing some other things too, eating right, which I've basically always done. But there were some other very specific things. And I thought, I've got to give my husband a better wife for his birthday, which was 2 or 3 weeks away. And I thought, what am I going to do? I've got to improve my positives about myself. And I was counting them, and they were in the bottom cycle of the chart, between 1 a day or 0 a day and 10, maybe up into 15. But they were at the bottom, and there was a whole lot of bounce in there. And I thought, this is not good. And I would not accept this kind of bounce if I were teaching a child reading or math or science or something. So I thought, well, I'm doing all these other things and nothing is working. And did I say I was writing in my journal every day as if that was going to solve the problem? Okay. So I thought, I only have 2 weeks left. And I thought, well, a 1 minute timing works for reading and it works for math. Yeah. Maybe it'll work for this. And so I started doing a 1 minute timing, and in 2 weeks, I had flipped it around. And
so a 1 minute timing?
A 1 minute timing. I was counting all day. Positive feelings, negative feelings, positive thoughts, negative thoughts, missed opportunities for both. So I had six counts going. And it seems to me as though there might have been some others. And then I added in the 1 minute timing. And that made the difference. It took the errors down. Not the errors. It took the negative and unpleasant thoughts and feelings down, and it boosted the positive ones up.
So this is a 1 minute timing of practicing what?
I was writing them down. I was writing down my positive thoughts and my positive feelings. And when it was a feeling, I asterisked it. Because, I could have a thought that I was intelligent, which, by the way, I did not believe at the time, even though people had been telling me that all my life. But it's like, if you knew the real me, you'd know that I really wasn't very intelligent. And I have since come to find out that women, of all the graduate classes that I've taught, I don't know, maybe 200 or 300 students, I might have 2 or 3 guys in all of that count their positive and negative feelings. All the rest counting it were women. And it's like, oh, wait a minute, we got something going on here. So I'm just...
So how many, like, what would the count be in a minute as an example?
Okay, for writing, and I used abbreviations, but I knew what it was.
Right.
I got as high as 35 positives a minute.
Can you give us a sample of what it might be?
Well, let me see.
Oh, she can. She's waiting for them.
I'm still looking for the original, but I have, if I can read it. Mature.
I have the luxury of being able to see what Abigail could call upon here. For people that don't know this woman, the information she has about herself and her life and the amount of time she has, it's an extraordinary story. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
Warm, well-balanced. That was a surprise to me.
Yeah.
Somebody up here said, "Oh, you're such a well-balanced person." And I thought, oh, my God, you got to be kidding. Potential for success, good mother, good teacher, good wife, good, whatever, good at sex, whatever. Introspective, excellent sexually, risk-taking, guts, independent, laughter, energy level, patient. Those are some of them.
Fantastic. And why a free write? Why write them down as opposed to just saying them?
Because it never occurred to me to say them. And also because it was very reinforcing, very rewarding to write them. And I could go back. At that.
You can, those ones that you're reading out now, like when did they come from? Are they current ones or they're something?
Oh, yeah, they're all current, but I did them in, my original list was 24 thoughts, 9 feelings, positive thoughts. Oh, here's the date, 1977, and it would have been September, October. Yeah, and then I've got a bunch at the top that I've got my 2 lists, one, thoughts on one side, feelings on the other side. And then I've got a bunch more at the top, probably another 20 or so, that people have given me as compliments. And it's like, oh, I got to add that to my list. And so, yeah.
And so would you then develop a list and just read from those, or you drawing upon how you felt in the moment?
It was not in the moment. And that's a very good question, because a lot of people have said, how do I feel right now? And one of the teachers at the school for kids with behavior and emotional problems said she had them count now feelings. I mean, she called them now feelings. What you are feeling now. So they had, but my point was, and we talked about this a lot, was they need to repeat all these positives because they may not be feeling it right now, but they could. The other thing we learned from that, which was fantastic and tragic, although they survived, we had 3 students, and I don't even know if it was in the same semester, that their positive count went times 10. In one day, it jumped times 10. And that to me, that to the teacher, Doreen Overman, and I became a warning, because that night, one of the boys returned to his dorm and tried to die by suicide. Another situation, a girl returned to the dorm, tried to die by suicide. And then a third situation was a boy, I think he lived at home, and he did that, and it was times 10. And the next day he committed a grand larceny. Anyway, it was a felony category. And so it's like Doreen and I were like, okay, any times 10 in one day means hang on to your hat and notify people this person may be at risk, may be in danger of doing something really stupid. Well, thinking about it psychologically, and I mean, this is nothing but theory, it's like, I feel fantastic. And then the crash comes.
Right.
And that would be my explanation for it. Whether it's accurate or not, I don't know. And it's subjective on Doreen's and my part that, something else was going on there and we never found it again. In the next couple of years, there was no student who jumped to times 10. So, and then not Doreen. Oh, later, Emma Cobain, let's see, that would have been in 80. Probably about 20 years later, 10 or 20 years later, Emma Cobain Douglas did her dissertation on inner behavior, and we used to do workshops together. And one of the things we found was, looking at her data and my data, was that, here's another, you do not have to take negative thoughts and feelings to 0. what you need, and of course that's not academic, that's a totally different thing. What you need is a minimum of a times 10 difference between the positives and the negatives. And we had some people who had a times 18 difference. I think that might have been the highest one, but usually times 15 to times 18. So as long as there was, that space on the standard chart showing that, we were okay, including then doing a quote unquote, because this is from the academics, but doing a retention chart. If you don't do the 1 minute timing for a month, how are you? And an after phase. And they were fine. They maintained that. When Emma and I looked at that, it was like, oh my gosh, how could we not have realized this before? How could we not have seen this before? It was so obvious to us at that point.
Oh my goodness, I'm just got goosebumps talking to you about this. It's just so profoundly impactful what you're talking about here, Abigail. We're talking about something that you have developed that for a minute of a day, somebody could spend time practicing these things and profoundly change the way they interact with their environment. How many students do you think have been impacted by your work, if you had to say? Like, where has it shown up and where is it still being used?
I've had about 100 people. Okay, over 1,000 people have counted inner behaviors in research studies. And of those, because most of them were before I did the 1 minute timing on thoughts and feelings, most of them, since then, it's been 100. And the interesting thing about 100, or slightly over, the interesting thing to me is that none of the research studies were suggested by me or supervised by me. It was like, I remember Leo Raina called me up one day, and I'm like, Leo Raina is calling me. I don't know whether you know who that is or not, but
I don't.
Okay, it might as well have been Skinner calling me. Totally on it. I answer the phone. This is before the days of cell phones, and it's like, "Hello, this is Leo Raina. I'm the editor of, Joe Walpe and I are the editors of Social Behavior and Psychiatry, which is a European journal." And I'm like, I know who you are. I didn't say that, but it's like, why are you calling me? He was calling me because he had received a paper by Doug Kostowitz, where Doug had done this as a master's thesis under John Cooper. And so he just wanted to talk to me about it. And I was like, it was fun. Wow. It was great. He's marvelous on the phone. He's no longer alive, but he was marvelous on the phone.
And what was the outcome of your discussion?
He was just telling me that he and Whoopi had decided to, I think Whoopi was still alive then. But anyway, he decided to accept Doug's article in the journal, and he wanted to let me know and wanted to compliment me on being the source of this technique and talk to me a little bit more about it. And so, I'm not at a research institute. I don't work at a hospital. I don't work at a university. So all of this is people hearing about it and doing it as a research project. And so,
do you know if anybody has ever done it for their approach to parenting? Like, in other words, use positive statements about parenting?
Question. Not that I know of. But you see, I didn't know about any of these other people who did the 1 minute timing until somebody said, hey, did you see this article? Or ISIL in Oklahoma said, I happened to come across it because there was a reference to in the Cooper, all of a sudden the Bill Heward, the book's right over there, but I can't remember the third author. I seem to be able to do 2 these days, not 3. No, I'm joking. And mentioned Doug's article, or the Kostowitz article, and I went to look at that, and that's where he cited you, and I found your name. So she called me, or emailed me. She emailed me, of course. And the same way you did. It's like I get this email, and both of you at the same time, which is so, within days of one another. And it's like, wow, this is really great.
I just, so impacted by the fact that as a parent of a child with autism, this is a profound intervention that parents could use when they're dealing with, the coming to terms with the diagnosis of their child and then having to get into early intervention and it's a very challenging thing. But I think taking a minute a day as an intervention. Incredible. Anyway, there you go. So now we have a 2-week period of time, to transform yourself as a wife. And so that's how we got into talking about the 1-minute timing. You started so 2 weeks, you charted your data. I want to talk about how you did that, because most people that are listening to this haven't seen your incredible watch, but I am going to put that in our resources so that you can see. So you were using your watch, your counter with beads
right
on
here.
the watch. Yeah, of course nobody can see that. So I'm going to,
right.
But I can.
Did I send you a photograph of it?
Found it on Facebook, so I am going to put that in our resources. Yeah, a beautiful photo on Facebook of you wearing that watch.
Right, John Eshelman took that picture.
Because you mentioned before that you would track 6 of your behaviors a day, and so this watch has the ability to count multiple behaviors. Yeah, so I'm going to show people that. What could people be using today if they don't have the ability to make a watch like that?
Cell phone. One of the people, a friend of mine, she's a psychiatrist, and she was recording, I forget exactly what now, but it's published in an article. She was recording something similar to feeling centered, feeling peaceful. Golly.
Oh, yeah.
I can't.
Yeah, I mean, I have an app that's called Counter, just that. And, well, just right now you can see positive and negative statements. But it's very easy.
She was using a BlackBerry at the time. And so she counted it as she had positives and negative sign and maybe a circle. And I can't remember exactly what they represented, but I did state it in the article. And, of course, I asked her if I could use those data in the article. And so
it strikes me that you could write a book called How to Save Your Marriage in 2 Weeks.
Oh,
in
my
1 minute a day.
If I looked at that title, I'd say, oh, yeah, give me another one.
That's the profoundness of these interventions. So, right, we are in Kansas. Do you remember you mentioned to me that you would have weekly supervision on your project? How did you decide what your project was going to be? And what was the title of your PhD?
Og gave me about 5 or 6 different topics to choose from. And what I found was that 3 weeks later, there was only one of those topics that I still thought about. And that was inner behavior, something in inner behavior. What was it? You really want to know the title of my PhD thesis? Oh, here it is right
100%.
here.
100%.
Measuring and comparing perceived facts, funds, and freedom. I'll put it up there for you.
Oh, there you go. Yes, please. 1979. You told me before you actually know how many hours it took you to write that PhD.
Yes, right, including the studies that I did. I did 3 different studies. It was about 1,700 and, I don't remember the exact number, 1,710 hours or 1,760 something, 1,750 we'll say for right now. And so.
And tell us, how did that time with Og change the trajectory of what you did?
An interesting thing is what I did, I gave him my pilot project at one of my meetings. Yeah. And then at the very end, with fear and trepidation, it's the only way to describe it, I said, I did some charts I'd like you to take a look at. And I handed him this set of charts that I had done, the birthday present that created the birthday present for my husband. And he looked at them and he said, this is incredible. You have to change your dissertation topic. And I'm like, oh my God, you're kidding me. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. It's like, I don't know, months or years later, I thought, you don't tell your advisor you are not going to follow his suggestion. I mean, it was just, I'm not going to do that. And I think he probably said something like, why not? And I said, what I have for my thesis right now will be the pilot project, the pilot study for my work on inner behavior for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And he sat back and said, okay. And I'll never forget that. I mean, as I thought about it later, it's like, how on earth did you have the guts to tell your advisor, no, I'm not going to do that?
How would you describe your relationship with him? What was he like as a supervisor and a mentor?
Oh, he was great. I mean, we both had incredible senses of humor, so, it was easy to laugh. There was one other time that I told him he was wrong, maybe more than one, but another time I told him he was wrong. He said that he never should have done the behavior bank because nobody uses it. And this was after one of our meetings. We were walking out of the building, and I said, you're wrong. I said, what you have done is a great contribution to the study of human behavior. And if nobody is using it, that is their problem. But you give it another 100 years, and people will look back on that and say, we've got some. Meanwhile, Galileo and Copernicus are running through my mind, and their relationship was to the heavens. Og's relationship was to people. The data that was gathered.
For people that don't know what the behavior bank is, can you describe
that?
The
behavior bank is where you take a chart and you describe, you don't describe it. It was entered into the behavior bank by each day's data was entered in, as well as, and then when they analyzed it, let me skip to that. When they analyzed it was first phase, highest pinpoint, middle pinpoint, lowest pinpoint. Last phase, highest pinpoint, middle pinpoint, lowest pinpoint. And then in between was the acceleration, and the steep acceleration, the middle acceleration, the low acceleration. And all these data were collected that would show what student learning, what human behavior, whatever was going on could be. And they did the summary.
What was his goal in creating the
his goal was to take a look at
what was his goal?
I have a feeling he's sort of sitting there saying, no, that wasn't my goal. But anyway, I'm going to do the best I can to represent what his goal was, to collect information on human behavior. And what we found was that most people communicate by what a child does, what a parent does, what a husband does, what a teacher does. And they don't go look up information in the behavior bank. And he actually sent me a second copy of the behavior bank notebook. He said, you're the only person who uses this information. And so here's another copy for you, which is fabulous for me because I have 2 homes now. Then I kept one in my office and one at home. But now I have a home in Alaska and a home in Oregon.
Where does it exist, the behavior bank?
I don't know. That would be a question for Scott Bourne. Where are these actual records? I mean, they were done on those giant reels of, we're talking entering things, or Carl Koenig would know. He was the one who did his dissertation on it. How do we have all this information and analyze it with people? And Carl looked at, I'm just drawing a blank right now. I'm sorry. Carl's dissertation was on the statistics of all of this information. Right. And then out of that, because the data were gathered between, I think, 69 and 71, and he finished, Carl Koenig finished his dissertation in 72. And so we didn't have, not only did we not have the technology that we have nowadays, we also didn't have the concept of acceleration in the way that we use it daily. We didn't use it daily then. We were more looking at the frequency of things. And then it was in the 70s, the early, mid, and late 70s, that we began to look at the frequency, the acceleration, and the bounce of data, or the variability. So,
how has the behavior bank contributed to the field of behavior analysis, do you think?
I think it has been ignored. Sadly to say, because for some, I don't know whether I want to say this or not, but for some reason, most people in behavior analysis look at Og as, out there. He's out there somewhere, which truly he was. He was out there somewhere. Problem is, he was years ahead of many people. And he was not going to talk about discrete learning. He was not going to impose record ceilings on people, which, when you do discrete trials, you're imposing record ceilings. And the student may be able to do the person may be able to do far better than imposing a ceiling on them. And so, he was one of those people who was, 40 years ago, I would say he was 20 years ahead of his time. Now, as time has passed, I would say he was well over 20 years ahead of his time, more like 50, 100 years. Somebody's going to look at that behavior bank information and say, holy cow, we've got, data on 42,000 people, and we've got, 300,000 charts. I mean, I don't know. Don't anybody quote those numbers, because I'm just pulled that off the top of my head. But we have massive, massive amounts of human data about how people learn and how people behave.
And so you spent a lot of time with him. Do you have any idea how many hours you might have spent with Og?
Oh, gosh, I never even thought about that. 3 hours a week for 75, September of 75 through May of 79, plus 2 to 3 hours a week. And plus I worked for him at the Behavior Bank. I developed the first bibliography of precision teaching literature. And then John Eshelman took that over and continued it. And I don't know where, we still don't have a complete list right now. John has talked about that. Maybe John and I have talked about that. We need a complete bibliography, not just a reference list, but the whole complete bibliography. And lots of social time. Robert and I, Nancy and I are still fast friends. Robert and I became friends with Og and Nancy, and we were out at the ranch one time, and we ate dinner. The four of us ate dinner on, a little tiny table that was probably 2 by 3 feet. And and then Robert went out in the field with Og, and, a round bale of hay rolled on our dog, and Robert thought, oh God, the dog's dead. Well, the dog got up and ran away after this, I don't know how much a round bale weighs, 1,000 pounds. And, I don't know how the dog survived, but he got along fine. Robert had grown up in ranch country, and Og just loved having this ranch with cattle. And so the next day I was telling someone that Robert and I had been out on the way home, one of the things we said was, isn't it nice to finally come across a couple that you can really relate to and have conversations with and talk about things that are academic, or talk about something like, cattle and, their behavior. And so we were very happy. And so the next day I was talking to a friend and said, we were out at Nancy and Og's and had supper there last night. And she said, don't you find them a bit odd? I said, well, no, actually. We were saying how much like us they are and how we enjoy their company. It's like, I didn't find them odd at all. I found them very normal, but maybe that says I'm not very normal. I have no idea. So,
how did he talk about being a maverick? And I guess you talked about him being, on the outer of the behavior analytic community and how people saw him. How did he cope with that, do you think?
Well, I think on the one realm, it was like, what I sometimes think, it's like, reach out, break out of your shell, move beyond your comfort zone. And I mean, obviously he had to do that. He was a World War II veteran. You can't live in your comfort zone when you're in a war or when you're a POW. Comfort zone is gone. And just the creativity of ideas. And then we grew up 20 years apart. I mean, he was about 20 years older than I, 19 years older than I. And we grew up 40 miles apart and in that New England culture. And I think that was one of the commonalities that we always had. I mean, you don't have to explain things to another New Englander. I don't have to explain things to another New Englander. And he was another New Englander. And also his father and my uncle had belonged to the same fraternity at Brown. although they were not at Brown University at the same time, but they were both very involved with the University Alumni Association of the whatever fraternity it was they belonged to. So I'm at my aunt and uncle's house, and I showed them a picture of back in New England, in Rhode Island, showed them a picture of me in my commencement robes and Og standing next to me. And they said, "Now, who is that distinguished looking gentleman?" And I said, knowing that a lot of people hear Lindsley as Lindsay, I said, "That's Ogden Lindsley." And they both looked at me and said, "Ogden Lindsley? Why, we knew his father."
Wow.
And they said of Ogden, he was a sandy-haired little 10-year-old, but he was a handful. I love that statement. And I told Ogden that too. And now his brother Bradford was much better behaved. And it was a story I just loved of their perception of Ogden. Well, he was brilliant. He was creative. He was doing things. He was curious. And,
curious.
And I just read a statement in one of the newspapers that I read. So it was an article about creativity and how creative people travel a lot. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I'd never thought about that. But, and you said something about my bravery, and I'm thinking, bravery? What is she talking about? But, if I'm going to go visit some cousins in Nova Scotia, my parents put me on a train and send me off. I'm 13 years old. That was just normal for me. And, flying from when one parent was in Maine and the other one was in Boston, I'm 9 years old, one parent puts me on the plane, sends me down, the other parent greets me. It's so normal to me that I don't even think about it, other than how beautiful it was in that flight and, how much I enjoyed it.
I'm so fascinated by what you just said there about creativity, because I found my way to precision teaching because of Karen Pryor. And early on when my daughter had been diagnosed, I read her paper, The Creative Porpoise, and I became so fascinated by novelty because I see, at least in my own daughter and other kids I work with, their biggest deficit is not seeking out the environment, doing the same thing repetitively. And, and I think I might have said this earlier, but when I called her up, I was like, I want to recreate, I want to replicate your study of porpoises with children with autism. And I'm pretty sure she said to me, I've been waiting 35 years for this phone call. And it's still my plan to do that in my lifetime. She mentored me for a while on how to teach novelty. This is something that most people would not think. But you look at schedules of reinforcement and you think, what is it about some people, right, that get bored very quickly and seek out new experiences and thereby expose themselves to more learning opportunities? And so I'm so fascinated by that. But then I look at what enriched environment and how you spoke about your father encouraging you to ask questions and keep asking and seeking out more information from a very early age. So, yeah. What should I ask you next? I've asked you so much and you've given so much. I mean, I just on a massive high, I have to say. I want to talk a little bit more about, I guess, your love for inner behaviour, where that's taken you now and how that's impacted the trajectory of how you spent your time, which you have a very good understanding of because you keep a record of it. So you complete your Ph.D. Where did that take you?
That took me to being a principal of K through 12 school, or actually at the time preschool through 12 school, of children with emotional and behavior problems, which I absolutely loved. And then from there, I went to being an elementary school principal for 8 years. And they weren't quite as severe, and some of them were positively normal and above average, and it was great, above average in behavior and thinking and learning and creativity. But it was... and then, what was it? Oh, we got robbed one time too many in Kansas. And my husband said, we're moving. You bought some land up in Alaska. No, we're moving. We have a house in Oregon. Call my mother up and tell her we're moving in with her. And I'm like, okay. So I don't know why he asked me to do that. Oh, I know. I was there. I was at the house. He said, tell my mother we're moving in with her. And I did. And she thought that was a wonderful idea. She was schizophrenic And sometimes she was as normal as the day is long, and other days she was way out somewhere else on a different planet. And then Robert said, you bought that land up in Alaska. Why don't we go to Alaska? And it's like, hey, that's great. Both of us love the outdoors. We love trees, the forest. I adore the ocean. If we'd moved in with his mother and we'd already bought the house years earlier after his father died, and we would be living in the desert, and I can't be that far away from the ocean. So at least not permanently. So we moved up here, and we live in the largest temperate rainforest on the planet.
What year did you move there?
1997.
Right.
And one of the things that, as I mentioned earlier, I have kept a journal. I started in 1963 when I moved to Scotland, and I was studying philosophy. I'd already majored in psychology as an undergraduate at the University of Colorado. Now I'm going to pursue philosophy. And so I started this journal, my aim being to solve the gap between philosophy and psychology. Wrong. So what ended up happening was I just kept this journal. I started in 63.
Yeah.
So last night I happened to be going through it, and I was absolutely astonished when I said, which is a term that I didn't even know I used, I was in Ecuador. And I said, oh, this is not a good day. I had another series of episodes yesterday. And what struck me about that was I wrote that statement in 2014, I think it was. And I didn't learn that I had epilepsy, which I've had since I was 5. I didn't learn it until I was 78. I was 78, and that was 2 years ago. And it's like, oh my God. And then I was talking to a friend within the chart community. We've become very close because she has epilepsy also. So we are, and she's been charting her seizures since 1999, I think. And very clearly, very definitively. And so, and we've looked at one another's charts, et cetera. And so I thought, well, what she calls them moments. And I thought, okay, but when I get a whole bunch of moments that run together like this and last for, 37 minutes or 5 hours and 3 minutes or something, that's not a moment. That's an episode of collective moments. And although I say I count them, it's like, I had one this summer that was, I think, 23 minutes long, where my vision just went back and forth, super duper fast.
Yeah. How do you start and stop a duration of episode? What you count as?
I literally look at my watch.
Yeah, but what are you observing in your own behavior that's starting and stopping the episode?
It's like my head is going 360 degrees very fast, continuously, or it might be feeling natural high. I don't have a better definition than that, but I would like one. I might have an illusion, a hallucination. I have come to find out that when I feel nauseous, that it's the beginning of something. That's the aura that I usually have, is feeling nauseous.
So charting this behavior, it's only in the last 2 years that you've known that this behavior that you recognize in yourself, which is a story in itself, is due to epilepsy. What has charting your own behavior, having known that now, told you about anything you can do to minimize the effects of epilepsy? I guess obviously the assessment of medication is one thing, the effectiveness of medication. What else?
Well, this is pretty obvious, and I knew this anyway, but it showed up on the chart that you need to get enough sleep. And I was reading this fantastic book about a man who has epilepsy. And I read it until 11:30 one night. And the next night I read it until about 10 o'clock. Both of those nights, I only got about 4.5 hours sleep. And that was like a Tuesday and a Wednesday. Thursday, I was a mess. I was tearful and I was depressed. Thursday and Friday. And then Saturday, I thought I was doing okay, but I went to play speed solitaire with the same group of friends that have known me we've been doing this for 10 or 15 years. And then the next day, one of the people said, "Are you okay? You were a little off last night."
Right.
You know, I've been trying to hide this all my life, not knowing what it was. And so I asked her to describe that to me. Well, she's a very practical person. I don't know whether she could put it in words. And so then it's what I do is I have to watch my behavior. And by counting it, I mean, this week it was pretty obvious. Don't get 4.5 hours sleep a night, for crying out loud. But mostly it's, if I have a whole bunch of these little ones in one day, then it's like, okay, something's going on, watch it. Slow down, take it easy. Make sure you take a nap today, or make sure you take a walk. You know, watch your behavior more carefully than usual so that you don't go off the deep end.
And are you charting duration of episode or instances?
When they start into a duration, then I look at my watch. I mean, I don't have clonic seizures, so I can look at my watch at the beginning of it and say, okay, it's 9:23 and or it's 1:32, and then I can look at my watch at the end of it. If I'm in really bad shape, I'll write down the time.
Right.
Or if somebody else is around.
And in that moment, do you just stop doing anything?
It depends. What I have since started doing is, I used to just power my way through it. I mean, I'd be at work and this would go through.
What it was.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at work. I'm a principal. I'm in charge of this building of, 300 kids with buildings with emotional and behavior problems. I can't just stop. But what I ended up doing for 4 days, 2 of them at work, 2 of them on the weekend, it was just so constant I couldn't count it. And so I had to mark on the chart too much to count, or, couldn't count it. And so
what's a bad day on a day when you can count it?
A bad day is when it lasts for 4 or 5 hours. A bad day is when it lasts for an hour and I can't stop it. And it might be different things. I mean, it might be repeated short hallucinations.
Have you found anything that you can do in the moment, to stop it or to redirect it or interrupt it?
Not yet. Sometimes I know I can't stand up because I'm so dizzy I'd fall over. I meditated from the early 70s, probably 72, until 2 years ago, every morning for 20, 30 minutes. And what I found was that this behavior occurs a lot when I'm meditating. Now, a lot of people that I know with epilepsy find that meditation helps calm them down. For me, it puts me in that out-of-body space. And it's like, that's one of the things. It feels great as long as I know that it will stop. But when I'm sitting there, I tried the other day, and it's like, I'm gone. I'm out of my body. I am not here in this chair. I don't know where I am. And so it's like, I have to get better control of this in some way before I can start meditating again. So it's like, that's out the window for me. Not out the window for somebody else. That may help them, but it's out the window for me for right now. And changing diet was an immensely helpful thing. Yeah, it was really amazing to me. But if it lasts longer, I mean, I can handle it if it lasts for 5 or 10 minutes.
Yeah.
If it goes beyond 5 or 10 minutes, I just put down what I'm doing, and I just sit, or I go over in the armchair and sit down in the armchair. I head to the house if my husband is in the house, because I know that somebody will be there if I go off.
And what would that mean, going off?
Going off means possibly passing out, possibly going unconscious is what it is. I've learned to lie down on the floor before I fall down. This doesn't happen anymore with the medication, but I mean, with the increased medication. But it would be, what do I being with someone? And it's like I was in the middle of a Zoom Pilates class, one-on-one, and I said to the instructor who's in New York, call my husband and tell him I'm up here and I need him. And so she called him and he didn't answer the phone, and she called, which he usually doesn't. And she called him again and he answered the phone, and she said, Abigail's upstairs and she needs you up there. Well, I don't know what she said to him. I mean, I probably heard her because we're on Zoom, but he knows, that I'm off. And something happened yesterday, and he said to me, "Are you okay?" Oh, I know. It was in the middle of the night, got up to go to the bathroom, dizzy as all get out, so I counted that. And when I got back into bed, he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes, I am. I was dizzy, now I'm not, so thank you." And
so I'm fascinated about your discipline in counting those durations. In that moment where you felt a dizzy episode, would you have quickly penciled it down somewhere, the duration?
I look at my watch and I remember it.
And you remember it?
I remember the time, which is very unusual from what I've heard from other people with epilepsy.
So you might count 5 minutes, 30 or whatever is a dizzy episode. And what is the behavior that you're charting there?
I'm charting any one of 13 behaviors that is not normal. And I've got them in a list. Do
you think with the associate that you're working with, who's also a behavior analyst in a charter, does she have different ones?
Trying to think. Yes, she does. What she's counting is slightly different from what I'm counting.
Do you think this work you're doing together as a project might, impact the epileptic community?
Well, I think that's, it's interesting because we've said, okay, how many people are we going to get? Both of us were charters. And how many people are we going to get counting this? And that's not our aim. I think our aim is more to inform people about what happens to us. I mean, her epilepsy, she's on, well, when we first started, she was on 3 times the medication I was. Oh. And she has tonic-clonic seizures. Now they're under control. I've never had a tonic-clonic seizure. So we don't have the same thing going on. But as the more people I talk to and the more I read, it's like everybody's epilepsy is different. There are no people. I mean, this is, from in a medical article. No 2 people have the same set of symptoms. I mean, the brain is enormous compared to any other part of the body. And we can't see it the way we can see a knee or something like that. And so it's hard to analyze. So I just figure we're offering information. And yes, it would be great if more people would count, but I don't know. It's hard. I find I've had people count fetal kicks when they were pregnant. And some of them did, some of them didn't. Some of them counted for an hour a day. And I'm like, I think it needs to be more than an hour a day. Well, that's all I can manage, or 4 hours a day. And can you count all day? No, so.
Yeah, I guess coming in contact with counting your own behavior, putting on a chart and watching over time, gets you in contact with the reinforcement for doing that, which brings me to my next question, because I'm guessing you're going to say it's no coincidence that you had a near-death experience at the age of 5 and from a very early age became very aware that your own behavior was different to what you would describe as normal. Is that fair to say? Do you think that influenced your love and passion for this field of understanding what occurs below the skin?
I don't know as I'd call it love, because it was a real love-hate relationship.
But your interest.
My interest. My curiosity in trying to figure out what was going on. And I grew up in an analytic family, but being very analytic about, what's going on. And I never counted any of this until 1976. And the day that Og nailed me on one, I was already counting. But, I walked into his office one day and he said, "Have you been smoking pot?" And I'm like, "Really, Og?" I didn't say this, but it's like, do you really think I would do that before I met with an esteemed person who was my Ph.D. advisor? I wanted to say, you got to be nuts if you think that. But I didn't. He said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "No, everything's fine." It's like, meanwhile, I'm thinking to myself, baloney, everything's fine. Right now, good and well, everything is not fine. But I was not about to tell people what was going on in my brain. They might think I was crazy, and sometimes people have, sometimes professional people have.
What are your early memories of, I might be different or having different experience than someone else?
probably as soon as I could get out of bed and start walking, which was the epileptologist I see put it down as learning to walk again, which I thought, well, that feels a bit like an exaggeration. But I guess if you've been in bed for 3 months and the first time you get out of bed, it's like, I knew that I needed to put one foot in front of the other. Makes me feel
So
weak.
this is at the age of 5, you mean? When
Yeah.
After
the near-death experience, when I could finally get up and walk to the bathroom, which, by the way, was in between me and the bathroom was a 20-foot-long hallway, 22-foot-long hallway.
Wow.
And so I had to get to the door of the bedroom, my parents' bedroom, and then when I got to the end of this 22-foot hallway, I had to get into the little entryway that went into the 2 bathrooms that we had on that floor. So I was probably walking 25 feet. And I remember that there was one place where the stairway goes down, and I remember thinking, I have to get from this wall to that banister. And, I'm 5, I'm a little kid. I'm looking at a stairway, and it had a landing, so it had maybe 8 steps. But it's like, I got to get from point A to point B and not fall down those stairs. And I don't know, I was pretty amazed when I did that.
And in one of the conversations I had with you, you started to become aware that some of the things you were saying to yourself might be things that other, children wouldn't be saying to themselves. You said, I was very aware that my subvocal behavior was different to other children.
Yeah, definitely. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And you attribute that to the epilepsy.
I do now. I attributed it to having scarlet fever and a near-death experience and wondering if I had any brain damage. This was 1947. I started working at a school for children with what we then called minimal brain dysfunction or minimal brain damage.
Yeah.
12 years later, when I was 18 years old, I worked there full time while I went to the University of Colorado full time.
Yes.
And, it was just, I was drawn to, and before that, I volunteered at a hospital ward for terminally ill children. It's like I wish I could have said to myself, okay, you got something going on in here yourself, Abigail. Now you need to figure out, and maybe working on this ward will help you. Maybe working with these children will help you. I didn't have that kind of awareness. It was just, I was drawn to the field of special education. I was drawn to the field of people who have problems because, lo and behold, I was walking around. I used to refer to, I got to get rid of this albatross that I'm carrying around.
Wow. When was the first time you shared that with somebody? Where you go, I'm living with this thing, this secret?
The first time I shared it with someone was 2009. And I'd had a Lulu, and Robert was in Juneau, 60 miles away by air because there's no road to Juneau. And he was working as a nurse at the prison. And I went off. My body was not, my left hand was completely numb. My right hand was partially numb. I couldn't walk right. I couldn't walk at a normal speed. I felt like I was going to pass out. I felt like I was just not with my body. And so I finally realized, don't call a friend, call 911. And I ended up in the hospital in Juneau. They flew me over to the hospital. They had no idea what was wrong with me.
Right.
And for some reason, I'm sitting there waiting for the ER doctor, the emergency room doctor, to show up. And I'm telling the person who has taken my name and asked me to fill out forms and asked me how I'm feeling. I'm telling her about having had scarlet fever when I was 5 years old. And I had never told that to a close, I may have told it, as a factual thing, but I'd never told it to a person saying, this is related to what's going on with me right now, and I have no idea. So I go in, the ER doc shows up, and I go in and I'm talking to him, and he ordered a MRI that night, and then the next day had me come back for a CT scan. But I told him that night, about the near-death experience and the scarlet fever and the whatever strange things were going on in my brain that I told him about. And he wrote down nonspecific neurological symptoms. And I thought, I wanted to hug that man. And I've never written him a note or called him to say thank you. He probably doesn't even remember who I am, but that's okay. Still doesn't say I can't thank him. When I saw that, I thought, thank you. You are the first person to get me on the path of something that you don't know what it is and I don't know what it is, but you are on the right track.
But it was 10 years later before you got a diagnosis.
Right.
A decade.
And what happened was that I had some episodes in a doctor's office or shortly before in 2019, and where often with epilepsy, with a seizure, you end up with an irregular heartbeat. And I didn't know that until probably last week or the week before, sometime within the past month. And when I heard people start talking about it, and it's like, ooh, this is interesting. So the person in Juneau that I saw 10 years later said, you need to see a cardiologist. And I said, no, I don't. It's not my heart. It's in my brain. So we got in this funny little argument about that. And I've since seen her, and she said, you had either an arrhythmia or an irregular heartbeat. I can't remember which she said. Well, that was last June. Now I know that goes along with seizure, whatever type of seizure it is. So the next time I see her, I thought I can call her up and tell her that, or I can send her a note in, the chart or whatever. But it can also wait until the next time I see her, because I don't want it to be a challenge or anything else. I just want it to be information for her. And she's somebody, she worked with my husband. And so it's somebody that, we know on a first name basis. And I like her. She's great. So I just want to.
Who's that? So, your current doctor that you see in terms of epilepsy, though, you have shared charts with him?
Well, yeah. So she sent me up to Anchorage to a cardiologist. I go, I take my charts, both the hand-done ones and the computer ones, and I take them up there, and he looks at it. Well, the first thing he says, he walks into the office and he says, or into the consultation room and says, what are you doing here? And I said, thank you. Both of us knew I was in the wrong place. And 4 times in 23 minutes, he said, you have epilepsy.
Wow.
And so he said, go back to Juneau and get a referral to Renton, Washington, to the neurology clinic there.
Was that the first time you'd ever contemplated that that's what it could be?
No, it was not the first time I'd ever contemplated, but it was the first time anybody gave me absolute confirmation. And meanwhile, I'm thinking, wait a minute, he's a cardiologist. He's not a neurologist. He could be wrong. I mean, it probably took me a year to really, maybe 6 months to begin to accept that maybe this was true. Because I kept on thinking, maybe it's something else, Even though I could look at the chart, and I could look at Sheila's chart, and I could see, that, we got something going on here. So when I finally was in the epileptologist's office, and I showed him a chart, he said, why are you using a ratio chart? And I thought, oh, Lord, now I have to convince this guy, as I have had so many teachers or parents, never the children. Yeah. The children had no problem with it. It's the adults that had a problem with it. And I often thought, well, this would not be true of an epileptologist, but, what's your math problem was, one of my first thoughts that would come to my mind. And anyway, so I just thought, well, he passed that off. And then I saw him, probably seen him 4 or 5 times. And then the last time I saw him, which was June, I showed him the monthly chart of the monthly totals. And from July or August 2019 until, I don't know whether I put June on that one or not, but definitely through May. But it may have been June because it was the end of the month. And he said, may I make a copy of this? And I said, here, I already made you one.
You have it.
And so he kept a copy of it. So Sheila and I are both very apprehensive as we write this article. And it's a data-based professional research article with an N of 2, a single subject design.
And where will it
Where will it be published?
Well, we don't know. I mean, we haven't yet even had the courage to show it to our epileptologists. Hers may not be courage. Mine is definitely courage. It's, it's interesting because a friend from childhood called me. Her husband was a neurologist in New York City and a very well-respected one. And she said, "Oh, you would so much like a conversation with my husband, and he would love to talk to you." Well, he died about 6 years ago. And it's like, I know, Virginia, I would really like to just sit down and, he's not my neurologist. I'd just like to sit down and say, "Hey, Robert, here are my data. Here's my description and, talk to me." But that's not enough.
No one else on the planet would have this amount of data about their own behavior.
Right, probably not.
So on that note, I'm very aware of your time constraints. We didn't even get into your writing and how charting and precision teaching has impacted you as a writer and a poet, but I, of course, will reference your website and people can find their way to your writing. May
I interrupt for just a minute? Because there's an article that I wrote called Writing on Writing, and that's published in the International Journal of Educational Research. I think that's the name of it, the International Journal of Educational Research. And so there are charts in there.
Wonderful. I'm going to reference that in our resources.
And you can get to it through my website too. So
wonderful. Yeah, there's so many things that I wanted to convey to the audience about you, but I'm very aware of your own time. But I've asked this question of many people in the precision teaching community because, when I might get emotional here, but, when I found my way to this community of people, it changed the trajectory of my daughter's life and the children that I worked with. I was a BCBA that hadn't been exposed much to precision teaching or the chart. And when I did approach it, my supervisor at the time thought that I had joined some crazy cult and I'd lost my mind. And my goal in producing this podcast is to get people in touch with this extraordinary, the underpinnings of our science that seems to be lost, to someone that just is learning a little bit. And I wanted to ask you a question, if you remain hopeful that applied behavior analysis can draw on this work and, profoundly impact people that they work with. Do you still remain hopeful that people will get in contact with standard measurement and the use of the chart in their work?
It's not just within the field of behavior analysis. It's anywhere. Education, medicine, sports. There are some phenomenal things. Diana Dean in nursing, when she was training nurses, and Martin Levy from New York City, who teaches, I forget exactly where, Beth Israel comes to mind, and he has his students whom he's teaching orthopedics to do charts in their learning.
Yeah.
What Sheila and I are interested in is, and this is what Diana was interested in too, is getting the chart so that we're looking at these kinds of data in this specific way. That was her goal. And I remember she talked to Og about developing an hour chart, a 10-minute chart, because those are some of the time frames that you look at people's behavior with when you're in the medical field. And then Kirk Kirby has really, Steve Graff did it originally. He has since died. Kirk Kirby has done an incredible job with taking it into the field of physical sports, probably physical therapy as well. And, just all the different, John Eshelman and Steve Graff and Malcolm Neely looked at, and I've done a little bit of it, but nothing like what they did as far as, the trajectories of, John has charted the Aurora Borealis in, the 1800s or whatever, I don't know, and the yellow plague, or yellow fever, the bubonic plague, these different, and of course now there's that website or that Facebook page that is doing on COVID. Standard Celeration Chart and COVID-19, which is just, talk about a monumental collection of medical data. And we only came upon it because of this terrible pandemic that has struck the planet. And so, there are other areas, tap dancing, music. I taught a student piano, and I had one clicker in one hand for correct notes and another one for the errors, incorrect notes that she played. She'd never played the piano. She just wanted to. She was 5 or 6, and I didn't teach her how to read music. But in 34 lessons, she got to the point where she could compose 2 and 3 note chords with both hands and play it. And it was absolutely fabulous. And
Wow.
it's just, and then, Kent Corso and what he's done, he works in the suicide area. He's a clinical psychologist. And so we've done some things with the military.
Yes, and there are some wonderful videos on YouTube, which I'll also reference for people that are interested in that work. So that is wonderful information, but you didn't answer my question of whether you remain hopeful.
Yes, I do. I do remain hopeful. Whether it will be the behavior analysis community, I think it's more likely it will be people, just, the random people. I mean, Sheila and I think, if we could get this into a medical journal, it would be fabulous. If we could get it into a behavior analysis journal, that would be good. Those are our aims. And, of course, we're both hoping, at least I am, I hope when I show him the article, he'll say, where are you publishing this? And usually you think of where you want to publish it before you write it. But we're just driven to write this article. It's just driven's not the right word. But,
I guess what I'm really, I just wanted to go on from something that you said there, but, it's people from outside the field of behavior analysis that when I show them a chart, it's so evident to them. So I do a lot of parent training. Sometimes I just get parents to count, number of instructions issued and number of instructions followed. Realizing that a lot of parents stop asking their kids to do anything for them because it's so punishing. And when they put on a chart, this is like, why don't my kids have this at school? Why it's to people outside of the field of behavior analysis, it's very evident and very obvious that this is an extremely powerful tool. And on that note, I wanted to say that it's only just recently that I became aware of AimStar, a project that you've been involved in. And I think it's such an easy tool to use. Like, you can learn to chart in a matter of minutes. Of course, you put a lot of your work on paper charts. I learned how to chart on a paper chart as well. But in Australia, it's actually very difficult to get your hands on a paper chart because you have to order them online and it takes a long time to get here. And so can you talk a little bit about AimStar? Because there are people listening to this that could start using a chart today, and it's a free application. Talk to me about how you came to be involved in that project.
It has to do with, Kent and I, he was in the Air Force for 10 years. His wife is a colonel in a branch of the medical aspect of all of the units, all of the branches, And I'm connected with the military because my husband was in, he did 3 tours and he retired. He started off enlisted and retired with 28 years and a senior officer. So although I've never been in the military, I've always been interested in that. And I thought nobody in my family was in the military until I learned more. No, I never thought that. My cousin's husband was killed in World War II. So from the time of being a little kid, I was alive and aware of World War II during that time. And we had relatives living in England. So that, and then he met 2 not co-workers, but 2 military fellows. One called him randomly. And so they started working with us and can we do a computer chart? And so we've done that. And right now, AimStar Lite is free up to 5 charts. You can use that. And in fact, that's what I use right now. Mike, our computer tech, our IT person, is refining the light one, and we will come out with that shortly. And in that group of these 3 military guys and me, I'm what's called in military lingo, the SME, the subject matter expert. I'm the person who has, decades of charting behind me. And what I loved, and I love this, Kent sent me a chart, I don't know, what's this, 2021, probably 10 or 12 years ago, of suicides in the Air Force. He just, he found a chart, he charted it, and he sent it to me. And it's like, I love things like that. Giordana sends me a chart in 2000, I think it was, and it's like, Giordana, I didn't even know you were doing this project, and she sends me this chart. And so I love it when I get these random charts. It's sort of like, I didn't know Kostowitz was working on an article. I didn't know when Rick Cabina was working on his master's degree that he was doing inner behavior. He did it before Doug did it. And, they're like gifts. These people just, they hear about it and they do it. Now, it's certainly not as happening as quickly as what I had hoped it would. I remember telling Og when I heard his first lecture, there were 100 people there. Maybe there were more like 300 people there. And I said, oh, God, Og, this is absolutely fantastic. People will be doing this all over the place. It'll be in the schools in no time, which is what we believed when we were at the University of Oregon in special ed. People will get this special ed thing and they'll start, not even with the chart, they'll start realizing, I'm sorry, it doesn't happen that fast. It's taken a life's, many, many, many people's lives worth of work to get people to realize that, and that's the way I view epilepsy, and that's why I talk about it. We didn't used to talk about children with retardation. We didn't used to talk about adults in mental hospitals, as they were called then. We didn't used to talk about autism. These were verboten subjects. You just didn't bring it up. I have a problem in my family. I feel like Robin Williams or Trevor Noah right now. It's like, this is happening. And when I found out I had epilepsy, I thought, I'm not going to be one of these silent people going around, because people are afraid of people with epilepsy, the way they were with people who were retarded or whatever the disability might be. And cerebral palsy, anything. It's like, I'm just going to be out front with it. And so I'm collecting ideas I usually write more than one book at a time. And I'm collecting ideas right now for a memoir about having epilepsy. And I came up with the idea April 13th of this year that I needed to write a memoir. Well, I was talking to a friend who had done some counting. She's a psychiatrist, and she said, Abigail, she said, that's not a novel. That's a memoir. And it's not about whatever you're thinking it's about. It's about epilepsy. And I said, oh, my gosh, Susan, you're right. And
And is that your next publication that you expect to come out?
I don't know whether it'll be the next publication, because I'm working on a couple of others at the same time, a couple of other books at the same time. So, but it will happen. So,
yeah. Well, I want to wind up by saying that this has been one of the most wonderful experiences of my life, spending, more than 6 hours with you today. And I would just love to learn so much more from you. And I guess I have been struck by your courage, your boldness. And I think people in this community of precision teaching have to have that within them, because we are on the outer edges of, and people might think we're a little bit crazy. I guess I'm inspired because I'm in the process of trying to educate our authorities in Australia through a program we have called the National Disability Insurance Scheme about the importance of making service providers accountable for what they do with children with disabilities. And just yesterday, there was a major case that came out where, I imagine, I haven't spoken to Giordana about this, but it might be the first time that authorities have really looked at charts and been able to see the reduction in severe and challenging behaviours on chart. And it was presented as evidence to a court case, and this family got a significant amount of funding as a result, because his deceleration on SIB in 1 year was profound, and even they could work it out. These are authority figures in government that were able to look at my self-injury charts and my aggression charts and my pica charts and go, wow, this is pretty interesting stuff. And we can see a profound improvement in a child in 12 months who has been struggling for a long time. So my commitment and what I feel very motivated by spending time with you is to be bold and courageous. And I can't remember how you described it, but so beautiful, but challenge yourself to think outside of what you're currently doing, to see if there is something in precision teaching that might improve the way you teach and behaviour you take. And you're an incredible stand for charting your own behaviour and learning about inner behaviour, which so many people outside of the field of behavioural analysis think that we ignore. And then we don't care about things that occur below the skin. So there are just so many messages that have come out of our time together, and I can't thank you enough. It's one of my life's privileges to have spent time with you, and there are a lot of resources that I'm going to share with our audience. Of course, AimStar, which you can find in the Apple Store, but your work and your publications and photos and so many things, and I feel incredibly proud to have been able to share a tiny snippet of your life's work in this format.
Good. It's been a lot of fun too, Mandy. Yeah. I do have a question for you. Are you considering going to the Boston ABA International May of 2022?
Well, I live in a state of Australia and we're not allowed to travel outside of this state. Yeah, we have 0 rates of COVID, but as soon as I can travel, I'll be coming back to the States. So it's where I found my way to precision teaching when I was living in Indianapolis, and it's now become my life's work here. And Giordana Hergo is she did her Ph.D. in Australia in precision teaching, but there are very few people in this country using a Standard Celeration Chart. I don't know any. Maybe one that I've been introduced to that I'm still in the process of reaching out to, but I don't know anyone else that charts. So I have a big job ahead of me, but I will be back to America as soon as I possibly can. And on that note, because hopefully people will be listening to this before the Precision Teaching Conference.
The Precision Teaching Conference, which presents all data on these charts, will be in Florida, November 11th and 12th this year. And then the Association for Behavior Analysis International Conference will be in Boston, both of those being in the States, in May of this year. And then actually the ABA International, which is every other year, is going to be in Dublin in September of 22. And then the first International Precision Teaching Conference will be in Galway in June of 23.
Great. So where can people find out more about that in the Standard Celeration Society?
Acceleration.org.
Acceleration.org.
CELERATION. Right. I know you know how to spell it, but.
I know, but if you type it into your phone, it will automatically change it to celebration, which is kind of appropriate, isn't it? So, well, I want to celebrate that I undertook this project to try and bring stories of precision teaching to more people, and I could not have imagined a better person to tell their story, an extraordinary life, and you still have a long way to go and a lot of charts to produce, a lot of behaviour to collect. So thank you times 1 billion for your time and energy and your laughter and your hopefulness about, how people can use the chart and what has been learnt to date about how to change their own behaviour and people that they work and maybe become a better partner in the process.
I believe I did. I believe I did. My husband was fine.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Mandy. I really appreciate it. I have enjoyed it immensely.
I hope you enjoyed your time with Abigail. I'm so grateful for her time and her assistance in launching this podcast. To find out more about Abigail and her extraordinary work, including her writing, you can visit her at www.abigailbcorkin.com. Thank you for listening to this episode of the ABA and PT podcast. Please rate and subscribe to the podcast in the platform you're listening to this episode on. And if you'd like to be part of our community, check out our Instagram and Facebook page, the ABA and PT podcast, where we post regularly about precision teaching and ABA topics. And if you'd like to interact with like-minded people that are looking to learn more about PT, you can also join our ABA and PT podcast Facebook group. You can find all these in the show notes of this episode. In our next episode, I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Kimberly Behrens, who talks to me about the state of play in ABA and her insight into how the science has strayed from its underpinnings, her mentorship by Dr. Ogden Lindsley, and what we can do to ensure our measurement is adhering to behaviour science. And speaking of giants, I leave you with one of Og's most famous quotes. "Stand on my shoulders as I stood on Fred Skinner's shoulders. You see more big things from up here, and you see further." Ogden R. Lindsley.